The moment everything changed, Brock leaned forward, forearms on the table, voice dropping just enough to carry menace. "Walk out now," he said, cracking his knuckles one by one, loud, slow, deliberate, "or I'll put you in a coma." A few heads turned fully this time. Jessica didn't look surprised. She looked satisfied, like this was exactly what she'd orchestrated. Calvin's eyes moved from Brock's thick, scarred knuckles to the phone still recording on the table, its red light glowing faintly. This wasn't a divorce meeting. This was a performance, and he'd been cast as the defeated veteran. The bait was set, the trap was sprung, and Calvin, who had walked into compounds at 2 in the morning knowing someone might try to kill him, recognized exactly what this was: an ambush, not with weapons, but with humiliation. Not on a battlefield, but in a bar. And unlike every fight Brock had ever been in, this one wouldn't have a referee to stop it. Murphy's Bar hadn't changed in 15 years, and perhaps that's why Jessica chose it. A place frozen in time for a relationship that had already died. The neon beer signs still flickered unevenly against dark wood paneling, casting uncertain shadows across tables where conversations mixed with the smell of fried food and spilled ale. A muted football game glowed from televisions above the bar, commentators moving their mouths without sound, creating an atmosphere built for noise and distraction rather than the kind of closure Calvin Briggs had been promised. When he stepped through the creaking entrance that Thursday evening, Calvin wasn't nervous, despite the unusual circumstances. He had walked into compounds at 2 in the morning with less information and more at stake, had knocked on doors overseas, knowing someone on the other side might try to kill him. Signing divorce papers at a neighborhood bar should have been simple, but Jessica had insisted on neutral ground, claiming it would be less tense, though her real motive would soon become clear. Calvin adjusted the cuffs of his plain navy button-down shirt and scanned the room with the automatic awareness of someone trained to assess environments. A few heads turned briefly before returning to their drinks and conversations, except for one table in the corner booth near the back wall, the same booth where he and Jessica used to celebrate anniversaries before his deployments, before distance became permanent. She looked different now, not dramatically, but intentionally. Her hair was straighter, sharper, her makeup deliberate, and she wore a fitted black dress that seemed designed for attention rather than paperwork. But what made Calvin's jaw tighten slightly wasn't Jessica's appearance. It was the fact that she wasn't alone. The man beside her filled the booth like he owned it, wide shoulders and thick neck creating an imposing presence that seemed carefully calculated. Veins ran across forearms that rested on the table like coiled cables, and his t-shirt stretched tight across his chest in a way that announced intention rather than accident. Brock had a predator's smile, slow and confident, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Calvin had seen photos before, gym posts and highlight reels that Jessica hadn't bothered hiding during the final months of their marriage, but they hadn't done justice to Brock's physical size or the aggressive energy he projected. When Jessica noticed Calvin approaching, her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like satisfaction. "There he is," she announced, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. Brock turned his head slowly, sizing Calvin up without bothering to stand, his eyes moving over Calvin's lean build, clean-shaven face and calm demeanor with obvious dismissal. Then Calvin noticed something else. A phone rested against a salt shaker on the table, angled slightly upward with its camera lens pointing toward where Calvin would sit. The small red recording indicator glowed faintly in the dim bar light. In that instant, Calvin understood with absolute clarity that he hadn't been invited to sign papers, he'd been invited to perform. Before Murphy's Bar, before the recording, before the threat, there had been an airport. Countless airports, actually, each one marking another deployment, another goodbye, another promise to return. Calvin still remembered the smell of jet fuel and over-roasted coffee as he stepped through sliding doors into arrivals terminals, duffel bag over one shoulder, eyes scanning automatically, body wired for threats, even under fluorescent lights. Jessica used to run to him during those first few deployments, sprinting the moment she saw him, arms around his neck, laughing and crying simultaneously, telling him he was finally home. But the last time had been different. She stood near baggage claim, scrolling through her phone, and when she noticed him, she smiled but didn't move. He walked to her instead, kissed her, tasted peppermint gum. "You look tired," she'd said, and when he replied it was just a long flight, she clarified, "That's not what I meant." He didn't ask what she did mean, because somewhere deep down he already knew. Civilian life proved quieter than combat, but somehow heavier. Calvin took a position with a construction firm doing operations management, stable, well-paying, safe. Jessica began using that word safe like an accusation, claiming he was different now, closed off, distant. He tried everything, scheduled date nights, took weekends off, left his phone in another room, softened his tone when she said he seemed too intense. But something fundamental had shifted in her, and no amount of adjustment could bridge the gap. She joined a new gym 6 months after his final return home, initially framing it as healthy self-improvement. "I just want to feel strong," she'd said, "like you." He'd smiled at that, not recognizing it as the beginning of the end. Soon the gym became her second home. Early mornings, late evenings, weekend conditioning sessions. She started following fitness influencers, posting motivational quotes about transformation and power. Her wardrobe changed gradually to more fitted, more revealing clothing. "You've been gone most of our marriage," she said during one argument. "I had to build myself while you were saving the world." When he quietly corrected that he wasn't saving the world but just doing his job, she shot back, "Well, I need something that's mine." He didn't fight that because he respected independence, but independence transformed into distance. Missed dinners became routine. "I already ate at the gym," she'd say, tossing her keys on the counter, or "protein shake, I'm cutting." They began sleeping at different times, existing in different rhythms, occupying different worlds. He would wake at 500 out of habit, while she came to bed at midnight, smelling faintly of rubber maths and cologne that wasn't his. One night he asked gently, "Who's Brock?" She didn't flinch, which told him more than any denial could have. "Trainer," she replied smoothly. When he mentioned she'd said the name in her sleep, she laughed and called him paranoid, weaponizing his military training against him. "Just because you're used to looking for enemies doesn't mean there is one." The truth didn't arrive in a dramatic explosion, but in silence, a laptop left open, a message notification blinking, months of intimate conversations revealing not just an affair, but a complete rewriting of their marriage, of him, of everything they'd been. It hit the internet at 9:42 on a Tuesday morning. Calvin knew the exact time because his phone vibrated 3 times in less than a minute while he reviewed blueprints inside a half-finished office complex downtown. He ignored the first buzz. He always ignored the first buzz. But the second came with a text preview from an old teammate. "You good?" The third was from his operations manager. "Hey man, might want to see this before someone else brings it up." Calvin set his pen down amid the sounds of civilian normalcy, nail guns popping, radios playing classic rock, forklifts beeping as they reversed, and stepped into a quieter hallway to pull out his phone. There it was. Brock's page, a thumbnail still frame from Murphy's Bar showing Calvin standing near the booth with sleeves rolled in expression unreadable, Jessica partially visible behind Brock's shoulder. Across the top, in bold white text, "Local MMA prospect scares off military tough guy." The play count climbed in real time, 12,460 views, 12,500, 12,600. He tapped it and watched carefully. The clip had been edited with precision, beginning with Brock cracking his knuckles in dramatic slow motion, the audio sharpened so the sound echoed louder than it had in reality. Then Brock's voice, clear and amplified, "Walk out now or I'll put you in a coma." Cut. The camera angle shifted, zoomed in on Calvin's face as he unbuttoned his sleeves, background audio lowered, dramatic music layered faintly underneath. Calvin's words were trimmed strategically. "You fight in a cage," cut. 14 years, cut. 53 ways, cut, making him sound like he was trying and failing to intimidate. Then the final edit. Brock stepping forward, Calvin stepping back toward the door, freeze frame, on-screen text reading, and just like that, he walked. The video ended with Brock laughing and flexing toward the camera. No context, no balance, no footage of Calvin adjusting the phone or Brock hesitating. Narrative complete. Calvin exhaled once through his nose, feeling no heat rising in his chest, no urge to respond emotionally. He scrolled through the comments, already forming a battlefield. Guess the military ain't what it used to be. Cage beats battlefield. Dude folded. Jess upgraded for sure. Mixed among them were a few voices attempting defense. You don't know what that guy's done. Editing cuts a lot out. But they were drowned out quickly. Brock replied selectively, fueling the fire. Respect to vets, but don't talk tough if you can't back it up. Calvin locked his phone and slid it back into his pocket. "Everything all right?" his manager asked from behind him. "Yeah," Calvin replied evenly. "Just noise." But the noise followed him everywhere. Younger subcontractors watching the clip near scaffolding, sports radio discussing it during his drive home, his phone buzzing with unknown numbers and texts from Jessica. You could have just ignored it. Now everyone thinks you're unstable. By evening, the clip had crossed 50,000 views. Brock went live from his gym, and Calvin watched that too, not emotionally but observationally, studying the body language, the timing of uploads, the hashtags used. This wasn't spontaneous, it was strategic branding, leveraging controversy into promotional currency. And Calvin, whether he liked it or not, had become part of someone else's marketing campaign. Calvin didn't sleep much that night, not because of anger, but because of a shift in focus. Once his mind locked onto a mission, rest became secondary to clarity, a lesson learned years ago in places where hesitation cost lives. Information first, action later. At 500 hours, he was already at the kitchen table, with coffee black, laptop open, and a notebook beside him. The header he'd typed the night before stared back at him. Subject, Brock, full background assessment. He began with the obvious, searching Brock's public name, Brock Reynolds. Quick searches pulled up highlight clips, local fight promotions, and gym tags. The branding was consistent. Aggressive, patriotic undertones, slogans about dominance and discipline. Calvin didn't care about the slogans. He wanted paperwork. He opened the State Athletic Commission website where amateur fighters required licensing, and licensing required documentation. He searched, no Brock Reynolds listed in the last 3 years. He leaned back slightly, then searched broader, Reynolds B, Brock M, nothing recent. Calvin tapped his pen once against the table, then returned to social media, scrolling deeper into Brock's history. 3 years back, a birthday post from someone named Marcus R. with the caption, "Still can't believe you changed it to Brock," followed by a laughing emoji. Calvin's eyes sharpened. He clicked the tag, profile private, but the comments weren't. Another friend had replied, "Marcus Brock Reynolds sounds better anyway." Marcus. He returned to the commission database and searched Marcus Reynolds. There it was. License expired 18 months ago. Amateur record listed as 5 wins, 4 losses. Calvin compared that to Brock's Instagram bio claiming a pro record of 9-1. He opened another tab searching professional fight databases. No listing. He cross-referenced event posters Brock had shared, 2 of them labeled clearly as amateur exhibitions. One event listed him as M. Reynolds. Calvin zoomed in on a grainy fight card photo where the result next to Marcus Reynolds' name read, "Loss TKO Round 2. That loss appeared nowhere on Brock's social media. He wrote it down. 5-4 amateur record, inflated to 9-1 pro. No professional licensure. He dug further, searching older event footage on obscure video platforms, finding low-quality recordings uploaded by local gyms. In one clip, Marcus Reynolds stumbled backward after absorbing a clean right hook, the referee waving it off with a caption underneath reading, "Reynolds can't handle pressure." Calvin noted the date. That loss also didn't exist on Brock's curated highlight reel, which showed only knockouts he'd won, none he'd suffered. Selective memory. He moved to gym affiliations, discovering Brock currently trained at Iron Forge MMA, but older posts showed him at 2 different gyms within the last 4 years. He messaged a former teammate working private security for regional sports events. "Ever heard of Iron Forge banning a fighter?" The response came 10 minutes later. "Yeah, couple guys. Why?" Marcus Reynolds. A pause, then, "Didn't he pop hot once?" Calvin's fingers stilled. Define hot. Rumor was failed test after amateur bout, nothing public. Jim swept it quiet. He left before suspension paperwork finalized. Calvin stared at the message, understanding that rumor wasn't fact, but required confirmation. Layer by layer, he wasn't looking for a knockout punch. He was mapping structural weaknesses, documenting the gap between performance and reality. The turning point didn't arrive loudly. It appeared in a comment section. Calvin was seated at his kitchen table in late evening light when a new clip surfaced on Brock's page. Another gym video showing him mid-interview, sweat still rolling down his temples after sparring. A local podcast host held a microphone near his face, asking, "People are saying you've got that warrior mentality. Where does that come from?" Brock grinned, breathing heavily but theatrically. "Discipline," he replied. "Before fighting, I served. Military life builds killers. MMA just refined it." Calvin's fingers froze on the trackpad. The host leaned in eagerly. "You were in?" "Yeah," Brock said casually. "Did my time. Learned what real pressure is. Cage is easy compared to overseas." The clip cut there with dramatic music layered in, caption below reading, "From battlefield to cage," accompanied by fire emojis, flag emojis, and salutes flooding the comments. Calvin didn't blink. He replayed the line, "Before fighting, I served." It wasn't shouted or even emphasized. It was smooth, integrated seamlessly into the narrative. He scrolled through comments, seeing, "Respect for your service, bro. Vet and fighter? Beast. Thank you for protecting this country." Brock replied with a modest shrug emoji, never correcting them, never clarifying, just letting it breathe. Calvin closed the laptop slowly, feeling the room grow smaller. He had tolerated exaggeration, record padding, manufactured dominance. That was ego. This was something else entirely. He stood and walked to the hallway closet where an old olive green duffel bag rested on the top shelf, pulling it down carefully and unzipping it. Inside were folded uniforms neatly preserved, a shadow box containing medals, a patch from his unit with edges worn from real field use. He ran his fingers along the fabric, thinking of the names attached to that cloth, men who didn't come home, men whose families still visited headstones. His jaw tightened slightly. He zipped the bag shut and returned to the kitchen, laptop reopened to a new tab. He began with public records, veteran databases, and service verification tools available to organizations for credential checks. Search Brock Reynolds. Nothing. Search Marcus Reynolds. Nothing. He leaned back, considering different branches or spellings, then messaged someone he hadn't spoken to in over a year, Ethan Cole, Personnel Records Office. "Need a quiet confirmation," Calvin typed. "Marcus Brock Reynolds claimed prior service. Any record?" 3 dots appeared within minutes. "Full name and DOB?" Calvin typed what he'd gathered from licensing documents. A longer pause followed as he imagined Ethan sitting in some quiet home office, glasses low on his nose, accessing databases he once navigated daily. 10 minutes passed before the message arrived. "Zero record in DoD personnel system under that name or variations. No enlistment, no discharge, nothing." Calvin read it twice, then replied, "Check National Guard or Reserves?" "Already did," Ethan confirmed. Silence settled heavily as Calvin's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Could he have used an alias? Ethan's response came firm. "You can't serve anonymously, not in this country." Calvin exhaled slowly, returning to Brock's social media to scroll further back. There, 6 months earlier, was a photo of Brock standing in what appeared to be camouflage fatigues with sleeves rolled, boots laced, an American flag behind him. Caption, "Some battles never leave you. Grateful for the lessons." The uniform was wrong. Patch placement slightly off, bootlaces tied improperly for regulation. Small details civilians wouldn't notice, but he did. The deeper Calvin dug, the less impressive Brock became and the more predictable. It started with a phone call he almost didn't make. Calvin sat in his truck across from Iron Forge MMA. Engine off, notebook resting on the passenger seat as afternoon sunlight reflected sharply against the gym's glass facade. Inside, silhouettes moved in rhythmic bursts, bodies striking bags, trainers shouting corrections. The branding looked strong from the outside. He dialed the number listed publicly for the gym. A young woman answered. "Iron Forge, this is Melissa." "Hi," Calvin said evenly. "I'm looking to verify something for a sponsorship inquiry. Does Marcus Reynolds train there?" A pause. "We have a Brock Reynolds." Full legal name, Marcus Brock Reynolds. Longer pause this time, followed by keyboard clicks. "Yes, he trains here." "Is he in good standing with the gym?" Silence, more keyboard clicks. "He's currently not on our active billing roster." Calvin kept his tone neutral, meaning he's not on a paid monthly plan at the moment. "Outstanding balance," she said carefully. Another pause, a shift in her voice, now cautious. "Sir, I can't discuss account specifics." "That's fine, thank you." He ended the call and wrote a single line in his notebook. "Iron Forge, not active billing." He watched the gym doors as Brock exited 30 minutes later, laughing loudly with two younger fighters, slapping one on the shoulder and checking his reflection in the window before walking to his truck. No sign of financial strain in his posture. Performance didn't show debt. That evening, Calvin reviewed public court records again, filtering by civil claims. 2 minor filings appeared under Marcus Reynolds in the past 3 years. One from a training facility for unpaid membership dues, another from a small event promoter for breach of appearance agreement. He clicked the scanned documents. The first was straightforward, 6 months unpaid, case dismissed after partial settlement. The second included a complaint line that made Calvin pause. Fighter failed to appear for scheduled bout after promotional materials distributed. Brock had promoted that event heavily online. Calvin remembered seeing the poster with bold font, Brock's face central, dates circled in red. He searched the event results. The card showed a last-minute replacement fighter under Marcus Reynolds' name. No show. He picked up his phone and called the promoter listed on the filing. A gravelly voice answered. "Yeah? Is this Dan from South River Promotions?" "Who's asking?" "Name's Calvin. I'm doing background vetting for a potential sponsor. Want a clarification on Marcus Reynolds." A long exhale on the other end. "That guy. I take it there were issues?" "You could say that. Promoted him as co-main event, sold tickets on his name. Week of the fight, he stops answering calls. Reason? Later claimed injury, no medical paperwork. We had to scramble to fill the slot. Was he compensated?" He'd already taken in advance. Calvin let that settle. "Would you book him again?" Dan snorted. "Not a chance." Calvin thanked him and ended the call, adding another column to his spreadsheet. Promoter relations, negative. Then he remembered something Jessica had said months earlier. He's building something real. He just needs support. Support. Calvin opened their shared financial records, still having access to accounts not yet separated legally. Jessica had removed most activity from their joint credit card, but not all. He filtered transactions by merchant. Iron Forge MMA. Multiple payments over 6 months, and amounts varied, higher than standard membership fees. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning via certified mail. Calvin signed for them at the door without expression, thanked the courier, and closed it gently. The envelope was thick, but not heavy. Paper rarely weighed much, though decisions did. He placed it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Jessica had checked nearly every box. Irreconcilable differences, no contest, division of assets outlined cleanly. She wanted the condo downtown, waived claim to the house, requested no alimony. Quick, efficient, detached. Calvin read every page carefully, not because he planned to fight it, but because that's what he did. He examined terrain before stepping on it. His phone buzzed. Jessica. He let it ring once before answering. "Did you get them?" she asked. "Yes." "Good. I don't want this dragged out." "It won't be." A pause. She sounded almost disappointed. "You're not going to argue?" she pressed. "No." Another pause. "I expected something," she admitted quietly. "You've had something," Calvin replied evenly, "for months." Silence stretched between them. "Well," she said finally, regaining her edge, "I'm glad you're being mature about it." He almost smiled at the phrasing. "I'll sign," he said, "but I want one final in-person meeting." "For what?" "To close it properly." She hesitated. "Why?" "Because we were married 8 years." Beline stayed quiet for several seconds. "Fine," she said at last. "Public place." "Murphy's Bar," he replied. A beat. That's dramatic. It's neutral. Another pause. Brock will be there, she said, testing him. That's fine. You're not going to cause a scene? No. She exhaled softly. Tomorrow. 7? 7, he confirmed. The call ended. Calvin looked at the papers again, then signed them without hesitation. No flourish, just ink. He slid them into a folder, then stood and walked down the hallway to his home office. The door closed quietly behind him. On the desk sat a neatly stacked binder with tabs labeled and documents printed, screenshots highlighted, weeks of methodical collection, evidence arranged not emotionally but structurally. He opened it. Page 1, identity discrepancies. Page 2, fight record inflation. Page 3, suspension notice. Page 4, promoter complaint. Page 5, sponsorship denial email. Page 6, military claim verification. He flipped through slowly. Everything cross-checked twice. Nothing dramatic, nothing fabricated, just truth. He added one final item. Copies of Jessica's credit card statements with specific charges highlighted cleanly. He placed the signed divorce papers on top of the stack and closed the binder. The next evening, Calvin dressed simply. Dark jeans, clean boots, gray button-down shirt with sleeves buttoned this time. No visible scars, no rolled cuffs. He checked his watch. 6:35. He left the house with the binder under his arm and drove toward Murphy's bar. The same neon signs flickered in the windows as before, the same low hum of conversation drifting out when he opened the door. He scanned the room once, same table in the back corner. Jessica sat facing the entrance, looking confident, not smug this time, but confident. Brock sat beside her again, leaning back with one arm stretched across the booth, occupying space as if claiming it. His posture screamed ownership. Jessica noticed Calvin first, her lips curving slightly. He approached without hurry. Brock's eyes tracked him like before, measuring, dismissing. "Look who showed," Brock said, grinning. Calvin slid into the booth opposite them, placing the binder beside him on the seat. No one commented on it yet, but the weight of what was coming hung in the air like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The binder rested between them like a quiet weapon. Calvin didn't rush. He opened it slowly, deliberately, as if beginning a business presentation instead of dismantling a man. Jessica shifted in her seat, the earlier confidence she wore like perfume now thinning. Brock leaned back with a smirk that felt slightly forced, his fingers drumming against the table. "You really brought paperwork to a divorce meeting?" Brock scoffed. Calvin ignored him, sliding the first sheet from the binder and placing it neatly in front of Jessica. "I'll keep this simple," he said. Jessica glanced down, her brows pulling together. Across the top of the page, Department of Defense Records Request, no service found. "What is this?" she asked, though her voice had already tightened. Calvin's tone stayed calm. "You told her you served." Brock snorted. "I said I train with guys who served. Big difference." Jessica looked at him sharply. "You told me you did 2 tours." Brock's jaw flexed. "I said I was overseas fighting. That doesn't always mean military." Calvin slid a second page forward, a highlighted transcript of an interview Brock had given to a local podcast. "I fought for my country before I fought in cages." Jessica's face drained a shade lighter. "You said that?" she whispered. "It's branding," Brock muttered. "Branding," Calvin repeated quietly. "Interesting word." The air at the table thickened. Calvin didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse. He simply turned a page. The next document slid across the wood, an email header from a regional MMA promoter. Subject, "Do not book, policy violation." Jessica leaned closer, reading the lines. Failure to disclose suspension status, concerns about conduct, recommend other organizations proceed cautiously. Her lips parted slightly. "What is this?" "It's politics," Brock shifted in his seat. "Promoters blacklist guys all the time." Calvin turned another page, a scanned lab report with bold lettering near the bottom. Adverse analytical finding. Substance, boldenone metabolite. Jessica looked up slowly. "What does that mean?" Brock's voice sharpened. "It means nothing. Half the roster's on something. They just test selectively." Calvin tapped the highlighted section calmly. "It means he failed a steroid test." Silence. The noise of the bar carried on around them. Laughter from another table, clinking glasses, music humming low, but their booth felt sealed off from it. Jessica stared at Brock. "You told me the suspension was paperwork." "It was," he snapped. "Technical." Calvin didn't react to the tension building. He slid the next sheet forward, a printed statement of financial delinquencies, unpaid gym dues, equipment financing past due, credit card minimums missed. Jessica's eyes moved quickly now. "I've been covering some of that," she said slowly, almost to herself. "Yes," Calvin replied. Brock's head snapped toward him. "Stay out of our finances." "Ours?" Calvin asked mildly. Jessica looked at the dates, the balances, the transfers from her account. Her breathing changed, subtle, shallow. "You said sponsors were late paying," she said quietly. "They are," Brock insisted. Calvin turned one more page, a sponsorship rejection email, unable to proceed due to compliance concerns, pending regulatory review. Jessica blinked. "Regulatory review?" she repeated. Brock's composure was thinning fast now. "You're digging through my life like a stalker." "I requested public records," Calvin said evenly. "Everything here is verifiable." He reached into the binder again. The next document wasn't text-heavy. It was a still frame from the confrontation video, the one that had circulated after the first incident. Brock standing, Calvin seated. Caption online, "Former soldier intimidated by pro-fighter." Calvin slid a second still beside it, with timestamp overlay visible. Uncut version showing Brock stepping into Calvin's space first. The moment Brock lunged, everything slowed for Calvin. Muscle memory took over. Not thought, not hesitation, just calculation honed over 14 years of training, where split-second decisions meant survival. Brock's fist came in a tight arc, aiming for Calvin's jaw, a reckless swing loaded with rage and overconfidence. The entire bar seemed to blur around the two of them, glasses clinking in the background, Jessica's startled gasp, murmurs from nearby tables. Calvin shifted his weight subtly, a step to the side just enough to redirect the momentum. Brock's fist sailed past empty air. Brock snarled, turning mid-swing, fury blazing in his eyes. Calvin's hand met Brock's shoulder at the precise angle to exploit natural leverage. A slight press, carefully applied to a cluster of nerves at the junction of the collarbone and neck. Brock froze mid-motion, muscles locking like a machine jammed. His own weight began to betray him as he staggered forward, not from pain alone, but from absolute loss of control. "Calvin," Jessica's voice broke through, quiet, almost pleading. "Stop." Calvin didn't raise his voice, didn't lunge, didn't show anger. Every breath was measured, every movement minimal. His hands moved only to guide Brock down, maintaining absolute control without leaving a mark. Brock's eyes widened, confusion first, then alarm. He tried to push back, to throw another strike, but every attempt was neutralized before it could generate force. His limbs felt foreign, uncooperative. Panic flickered behind his aggression. A nearby patron knocked over a chair in surprise. Calvin ignored the noise, guiding Brock to the floor gently but firmly until the man was seated on the bar floor, arms hanging limply at his sides. Jessica had risen fully, pressed against the table, witnessing the scene with wide eyes. "How?" she whispered. "How did you—" Calvin's voice remained calm and even. Training is about precision, not spectacle. He stepped back slowly, keeping his hands visible, posture relaxed. No theatrics, no display of power, just efficiency. Brock attempted to rise, but a subtle nerve lock at the shoulder kept him anchored. He flinched with every movement, his bravado evaporating, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar: fear. The bar was silent now. Even the jukebox seemed muted. Patrons exchanged glances, whispering to each other. Some took out phones, but no one stepped forward. "You could have killed him," Jessica whispered, voice trembling. Calvin shook his head minutely. "I didn't. That's the difference." Brock's chest heaved, sweat pouring down his forehead. But it wasn't from exertion. It was the shock of realizing raw muscle and aggression couldn't overcome controlled technique and years of trained discipline. You can't," Brock gasped, words failing him. Calvin knelt just long enough to release the nerve pressure. Brock slumped slightly, exhausted, barely able to control his limbs. "Learn the lesson," Calvin said quietly, almost to himself. "Strength without control is nothing." Jessica exhaled sharply, relief flooding her features. "Thank you for stopping it." Calvin gave her a brief nod. "I didn't start it." He stood, collected the binder from the table, and walked toward the exit. His movements were calm, measured, deliberate, each step a demonstration of quiet authority. Patrons whispered, some stared in awe, others in fear. Brock remained on the floor, stunned, realizing that every performance he had displayed before, the knuckle-cracking, the flexing, the loud threats, were empty gestures against someone who didn't need to perform to dominate. The next morning, Calvin woke to silence. No sirens, no ringing phone, just the faint hum of the air conditioner and sunlight stretching across the kitchen floor. He poured a cup of coffee and opened his laptop, not out of habit, but to observe the world he had set into motion. The headlines hit immediately. MMA fighter exposed for stolen valor and fight record fabrication. Promoters and gyms distance from Brock Reynolds after scandal. Social media reacts, fans turn against viral fighter. Calvin read quietly, his jaw relaxed as the consequences unfolded exactly as he had anticipated. Within hours, sponsors began retracting contracts. Nutrition and supplement companies released statements distancing themselves from Brock Reynolds. His Instagram posts, once flooded with adoration, were now flooded with criticism and disbelief. He scrolled through forums where comments ranged from incredulous to mocking. "I can't believe he faked military service. All that flexing for nothing. He's a scammer, pure and simple." Even smaller gyms refused to allow him training privileges. Ironforge barred him permanently. Regional promoters emailed publicly that he was no longer welcome at events. It was a clean unraveling. Every lie he had built his image on collapsed like dominoes. Calvin closed the laptop and leaned back, letting the quiet sink in. He wasn't smug, didn't gloat, he just observed the same way he had observed Brock's weaknesses for weeks. Meanwhile, Jessica called, her voice thin, nervous, stripped of the prior arrogance. "Calvin, I saw everything," she began. "You've seen enough," he replied evenly. "I didn't know he drained my accounts, the credit card, my savings, everything I trusted him with." Calvin listened quietly, having already anticipated this. "I'm signing the divorce fully," she said, voice breaking. "I made a mistake." Calvin didn't respond immediately. He let the words settle in their weight. Final. "Good," he said softly. "Then we can both move on." Over the following weeks, the world reacted predictably. Brock attempted to relocate to a different state, hoping to escape public scrutiny, tried a new alias, but even there his history preceded him. Calvin, meanwhile, reclaimed normalcy. He kept the house, the space that had once been a battleground of betrayal, now felt like a sanctuary. He walked through each room slowly, noting small things: sunlight spilling across hardwood floors, the faint smell of coffee, the soft creak of the stairs. It was ordinary life, and ordinary life had become extraordinary simply because it was free of manipulation and pretense. He returned to work at his construction firm, which offered him a partnership, recognizing not just his technical skill, but his leadership and integrity. Evenings became calm. He ate dinner quietly, often alone, sometimes joined by a few trusted friends. Sleep returned in deep, unbroken stretches. No nightmares, no lingering anger, just rest. He spent quiet nights reflecting, recalling the confrontations, the months of research, the painstaking verification of lies. It wasn't about revenge. It hadn't been about spectacle. It had been about principle, about reclaiming truth from distortion. As Calvin walked through the neighborhood on a cool evening, watching children play and neighbors chat, he paused, watching the sun dip behind distant trees. True strength, he realized, was restraint, patience, strategy, knowing when to act and when to wait, and above all, knowing you never needed to throw a punch to win.